The lilies still held their perfume when the morning sun slipped through the blinds, striping the kitchen in gold and shadow. I stood at the counter, my fingers curled around a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. Steam rose in thin ribbons. But I barely noticed. Emily had given me this mug years ago, a cheerful blue one, painted with "World's Best Grandma" in uneven white letters. It feels strange in my hands now, as if it belongs to another woman, a woman who still had a husband, a bustling home, and plans that stretched beyond tomorrow. 3 weeks have passed since we buried Edward. Most days since then I've moved through the house like a ghost, straightening things that don't need straightening, catching echoes of his voice in the hallway, turning toward sounds that aren't there. Even my reflection in the hallway mirror startles me, hair grayer than I remember, eyes dulled by something heavier than grief. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness. I glanced at the screen. Mark. For a moment I considered letting it ring out, but habit, the old reflex of motherhood, made me swipe to answer. "Hello, Mark." "Mom, we need to talk about the house," he said, wasting no time on greetings. His tone carried that familiar tightness, the same one he'd used as a teenager when insisting on borrowing the car. "It's too big for you now. The upkeep, it's not sustainable." I gripped the mug tighter, letting the heat bite into my palms. "Good morning to you too." "Don't start," he said. "Sandra and I have been talking. We think it's time you moved in with one of us. The place is just too much for you alone." I turned toward the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, Edward's garden sat untended. The roses drooped. The herb patch was wild and overgrown. I could almost hear him teasing me about letting the basil go to seed. "There's no mortgage," I said flatly. Silence. Then came the laugh, short, sharp, stripped of warmth. Edward had laughed like that too, but his laugh had been threaded with affection. Mark's laugh cut. "Mom, please, Dad's pension barely covers your medications. We all know you're struggling." I set the mug down harder than I meant to, coffee sloshing against the rim. I'd never told either of my children that Edward had paid off the house 5 years ago, or that we'd quietly built a comfortable safety net. They'd assumed I was barely making it. I'd let them assume. Maybe it was easier that way until now. His voice kept going, talking about options and what's best. But none of it had anything to do with my grief, my comfort, or my future. It was about the house. Always about the house. Mark's voice was still in my ear when I heard the faint chime of another incoming call. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sandra's timing has always been uncanny when it comes to matters involving money or property. As if she can sense when the pot is starting to boil. "I've got Sandra on the other line," I said. "Let me guess she's calling to say the same thing you are." Mom," Mark said, with a sigh heavy enough to ruffle my hair through the phone. "Please, just listen to her. We've been talking about this a lot lately." "I'm sure you have," I said, and switched to the other call before he could respond. Sandra's voice came through smooth and bright, like she'd practiced it in front of the mirror. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" There it was. That faux sweetness I recognized from years of parent-teacher conferences, customer service calls, and, more recently, family conversations where she wanted something. I almost laughed at how quickly she skipped over any mention of Edward. 3 weeks since the funeral, and not a single question about how I was sleeping, eating, or holding up. "I've been better," I said. "Well, that's just it," she began, her tone tightening. "We're worried about you. Mark and I think it's time to be practical. The house is just too much for you to handle alone. And with your finances," she let the sentence trail off, letting me fill in the blanks with the image of myself as a poor, struggling widow. I almost told her the truth right then, that Edward had paid off the mortgage years ago. that I had enough income from his pension, Social Security, and investments to keep the house running and still have money left over every month. But I bit it back. I wanted to hear where she was going with this. Mark says he's already found someone interested, she continued. A friend of Lisa's cousin, cash offer, quick closing. It could all be done in a month. You wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of putting it on the market. A month? My voice came out cooler than I intended. Yes. And in the meantime, you could move into our basement. It's finished. You know, your own bathroom. A little kitchenette. We could make it so nice for you, Mom. And with Emily away at school most of the year, you'd have plenty of space. I pictured the basement. The same one that flooded every spring, where she stored Christmas decorations and exercise equipment she never used. The same basement where she'd seated me last Thanksgiving while her in-laws and friends filled the real dining room upstairs. I could still hear the hum of the old dehumidifier and the faint smell of damp carpet. How generous, I said flatly. She missed the sarcasm. And you could help with Emily when she's home. You know, she could use some guidance. College is expensive, and I'm juggling so much already. Meal planning has been a nightmare. Of course, Sandra struggled with meal planning the same way she struggled with laundry, yard work, and remembering to call her mother. She was an expert, though, in delegating these struggles to others, especially me. Tell me, Sandra, I said slowly. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for help. Not to complain about something, but to see how I was doing? Silence. Then, that's not fair, Mom. I've been busy. And Emily's college expenses. About Emily's college, I interrupted. How much do you think I've contributed in the last 2 years? She hesitated. I don't know. A little here and there. $12,000, I said. $500 every month. Directly to her account. Since she started school. There was another pause. Longer this time. That money helps, Mom, but it doesn't cover everything. Does Emily know it comes from me? Or does she think it's from you? Sandra's voice thinned. I don't see why that matters. It matters, I said. Because if she doesn't know, then you've let her believe you're the one making sacrifices for her education, when in fact, it's been me. And in the meantime, you've been telling Mark and probably everyone else that I'm barely scraping by. Mom, you're twisting this. No, I said, my voice sharp now. I'm seeing it clearly for the first time. I hung up before she could say more and switched back to Mark's call, which I hadn't actually disconnected. He must have been listening, because the first thing he said was, that was unnecessary. What's unnecessary? I said. Is you two having dinner together to discuss my future without me. What's unnecessary is assuming I can't manage my own life without your interference. And what's really unnecessary is lying about my finances so you can justify pushing me out of my home. Mom, he said, slipping into that patronizing tone that made my teeth clench. Grief can cloud your judgment. We just want what's best for you. No, I said. You want what's best for you. The truth was, I could practically see them at that dinner table, Mark, calculating how much of the sale price he could put toward a new house with Lisa, Sandra quietly working out how much she could funnel into Emily's college fund without having to touch her own savings. My comfort wasn't part of the conversation. My grief wasn't even on the agenda. Let me ask you something, I said. When you and Sandra talked about selling the house, did either of you ask how I was sleeping? Eating? If I needed company? Did you ask what I might want to do with the rest of my life now that Edward is gone? Of course we care about you, he said. Then answer the question. Silence. That's what I thought, I said. He tried again. If you sold the house for, say, $350,000, after costs, Sandra and I could each. I cut him off. Could each pocket about 160,000. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Mom, that's not fair. I get $4,200 every month from your father's pension, plus Social Security, plus dividends from investments you don't even know exist. Tell me again how I can't afford to keep the house. On the other end of the line, I heard the slow exhale of someone realizing the game had changed. You lied to us, he said finally. I never lied. You assumed and I didn't correct you. There's a difference. The line went quiet again. I could almost hear the gears turning, trying to find a new angle. Mom, he said at last, we can work something out. Maybe you don't have to move into Sandra's. We could find you a nice apartment. More manageable for whom? I asked. He didn't answer. By the time we ended the call, something had shifted in me. The fog of grief that had kept me drifting through these past 3 weeks had burned away, replaced by a clean, steady anger. They saw me as an obstacle to their plans, a problem to be solved, or better yet, removed. They wanted me out of the house? I'd leave, but not the way they expected. After I hung up with Mark, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while, staring at the mug Emily had painted for me when she was 10. My hands were steady now, not trembling like they had been in those first weeks after Edward's funeral. Anger will do that. Sharpen you, wake you up. I knew exactly where I needed to go. Edward's study still smelled faintly of his aftershave and the cedar polish he used on his desk. The chair was pushed in neatly, the way he'd always left it. A pencil sharpened to a fine point, resting beside the blotter. I opened the bottom drawer. The one he'd told me years ago was for serious matters. And there it was. A thick manila folder, heavy enough to pull against my grip. I carried it to the desk and spread the contents out, just as he used to when reviewing our finances. The first page I saw made me stop. The deed to our house. In my name alone. Not ours, mine. Edward had removed the children from any claim 3 years ago. I remembered now, faintly, the tension that followed one of Mark's visits, the sharp words behind Edward's closed study door. That had been the week Mark asked him to co-sign a loan for his restaurant idea. Edward refused. I'd thought at the time he was being overly cautious. Now I saw it for what it was. Protection. Next came a series of bank statements, balances larger than I'd imagined, from accounts I hadn't realized we still had. There were investment portfolios, carefully diversified, that had weathered market storms and grown stronger. And then, tucked between 2 files, a set of glossy photographs, a whitewashed villa with blue shutters, a terrace overlooking the sea, and bougainvillea spilling over the walls. Lisbon. The memory snapped into place the evening 6 months before his heart attack, when Edward came home grinning, a real estate brochure in hand. A place for us, he'd said, where we can watch sunsets and drink vinho verde without anyone asking us for anything. I'd laughed, thinking it was a fantasy. Apparently, he'd made it real. My hands shook for the first time all day as I found the purchase deed. Paid in full. Property taxes current. And then, at the very back of the folder, an envelope with my name in Edward's careful script. I sat back in his chair before opening it. His voice came to me as clearly as if he were sitting across the desk. My dearest Linda, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're dealing with the aftermath alone. I know our children love them, though I do. And I suspect they're already circling like vultures, convinced they know what's best for you. They don't. You are not a burden to be managed, or a problem to be solved. You are an intelligent, capable woman who raised 2 children, kept a household running, and stood by me through every high and low. Don't let anyone make you forget that. The house, the investments, The villa in Portugal. They are yours. Do with them what you wish, but make your choice based on what you want, not on anyone else's expectations. I've watched you put yourself last for decades. Now I want you to put yourself first. Go to Lisbon if you want. Live there. Travel. Write that book you've always talked about. The children will survive without your constant sacrifice. They might even grow because of it. With all my love and faith in your strength. Edward. P.S. The key to the Lisbon house is in my desk drawer, behind the photo of us in Venice. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat with my palm. For a moment I couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but stare at the photo he'd mentioned, the two of us on a sunlit bridge in Venice, laughing at something the photographer had said. I looked younger there, but not because of my hair or skin. It was the unguarded happiness in my face. Behind it, as promised, was the key, a small brass one on a keychain shaped like a Portuguese tile. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of it settle into my bones. The doorbell rang, startling me. I set the key down and opened the front door to find a delivery envelope on the porch, hand-delivered from the office of Connie West, our estate attorney. Inside was another folder, this one containing Edward's revocable trust documents. A note from Connie was clipped to the front. Linda, per Edward's instructions, this information was to be delivered to you 30 days after his passing. Call me when you've read it. I sat back at the desk and opened it. The language was dry and formal, but the meaning was crystal clear. I had complete control over all assets. The children were named only in connection with the life insurance policy, nothing else. The Lisbon property was to be disclosed to me alone, not to them, and only after that 30-day mark. Edward had even stipulated that any attempt by the children to force the sale of assets without my consent was to be reported to the attorney immediately. The last item in the folder was a small envelope containing a bank card. Connie's attached note explained that it linked to an account Edward called Linda's Independence Fund, with a balance of $60,000. Monthly deposits had come from his pension and investment dividends, quietly set aside without my knowledge. I leaned back in the chair, letting the truth sink in. They had no idea. To them, I was the lonely, financially fragile widow in the big, impractical house. But the reality was different. I was secure, solvent, and for the first time in decades, free to choose my own path, without asking anyone's permission. I thought of Sandra's voice earlier, all false concern and calculated offers. I thought of Mark's laugh, sharp and impatient, as if my life were a logistical problem to be solved. I thought of Emily's sweet, funny Emily who hadn't called in months but who might, just might, see me for who I really was, if she were given the chance. The phone rang again. Mark's name lit the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then I called Connie. "I've read everything," I said when she answered. And I'm ready to make some decisions." She didn't sound surprised. "Edward told me you might say that." We discussed the legalities, how to block any unauthorized attempt to sell the house, how to ensure my name remained the sole owner on all deeds. When I hung up, I felt lighter, as if someone had cut away a set of invisible ropes. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the brass key from the desk, and set it beside my mug. The blue paint on the world's best grandma letters was chipped in places, but the words still stood out. Maybe, I thought, it was time to live up to them in a way I never had before, not by giving everything I had away, but by showing Emily what it looked like to stand firm in your own life. The garden outside was quiet. The late afternoon sun, catching on the edges of the roses. Edward's roses. I could almost hear him saying, "It's your turn now, Linda. Take it." And for the first time since the funeral, I believed I could. That night, I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't the restless, grief-heavy insomnia I'd been living with for weeks. This time, my mind was alive with planning. Edward's letter and the trust documents had done more than reassure me. They'd reminded me that I wasn't powerless. For the first time since he died, I felt like I was holding the steering wheel of my own life. At dawn, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. I started making lists, something Edward always swore by. "If you can write it down, you can make it happen," he'd say. So I wrote, "Call moving company. Pack Mark's things. Pack Sandra's things. Contact property manager in Lisbon. Arrange travel." By the time the sun had fully risen, I had a plan detailed enough to make even Edward proud. I started with the boxes. In the attic, tucked behind holiday decorations and suitcases, were all the remnants of Mark's childhood he'd never bothered to take. Baseball trophies, yearbooks, the glove Edward bought him when he was 10. I wrapped each one carefully, labeling the boxes in large black marker. Mark, keep safe. In Sandra's old room, I found her piano books, the porcelain dolls she'd once obsessed over, and the stack of handmade Mother's Day cards she'd given me before she decided Hallmark was good enough. Her boxes got the same treatment. Sandra, keep safe. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with a moving company. "I need a truck here in 2 days," I told the dispatcher. "Half the load goes to one address, the other half to another, both local." The man chuckled. "Sounds like a big project." Not as big as they think," I said. Next, I called Mrs. Oliveira, the property manager in Lisbon, whose contact information was in Edward's folder. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and lightly accented. "Mrs. Harris, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Harris spoke of you often." "Thank you," I said, my throat tightening. "He told me you've been taking care of the house." "Yes, of course. It's ready for you whenever you want to come. The garden is beautiful right now. The bougainvillea is in full bloom." I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing it. "I'd like to come soon. Next week, if possible." She didn't hesitate. "I will make sure everything is perfect for your arrival." When I hung up, I sat back and let the feeling wash over me. This was happening. I wasn't just daydreaming about a different life. I was building it. The next day, I went shopping. Not for groceries or cleaning supplies, but for luggage. My old suitcases were worn and too small for the life I intended to pack. I bought a sturdy, deep blue set, something that looked like it belonged to a woman going somewhere, not running away. On the third morning, the moving truck arrived right on schedule. The driver, a broad-shouldered man named Reyes, stepped out with a clipboard. "So, 2 delivery addresses?" he asked. "Yes. This stack goes to my son Mark at 247 Maple Street. The other stack goes to my daughter Sandra at 892 Pine Avenue, NU." I handed him 2 envelopes, each containing a short note. "Memories are precious. Keep them safe. Mom." He smiled faintly. "Understood." As the movers loaded the boxes, I felt a strange satisfaction. These things had once been part of my home, part of my life. Now they were going back where they belonged. I didn't want them gathering dust here, serving as silent proof to my children that I could be depended on to store the past for them indefinitely. If they valued those memories, they'd make room for them. If not, that was their choice. I was in the middle of showing Reyes which furniture pieces to take when a car screeched into the driveway. Mark. He climbed out, wearing his serious business suit, the one Lisa had picked out for job interviews, and carrying a bulging manila folder. "What the hell is going on, Mom?" he demanded before he'd even reached the porch. Good morning, Mark, I said, stepping aside so he could see the movers hauling boxes. I'm having some things delivered. He glanced at the labels and went pale. These are my things. Why are you packing my stuff? I thought you'd want them, I said evenly. Memories are important. He followed me inside, his eyes darting from the stripped-down rooms to the pile of luggage by the door. We need to talk. Gregory's client is ready to make an offer on the house. You just need to sign today. And I'm not selling the house, I said. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. What do you mean you're not selling the house? Sandra said. I don't care what Sandra said. This is my house, and it's not for sale. Mom, you can't just— I can, I said, my voice firm. And I am. He tried again, switching to the wounded son tone that had worked on me so many times before. We were trying to help you. You're alone in this big house. I'm alone because the two of you are too busy calculating what you can get from me to actually spend time with me, I said. Don't pretend this is about my comfort or my well-being. He bristled. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is you deciding my future without asking me what I want. The movers came back in for another load, the sound of their boots on the hardwood filling the silence between us. I picked up the handle of my new suitcase. You wanted me to move? I'm moving. Just not to where you thought. Where? He asked, suspicion and curiosity wrestling in his voice. Somewhere warm, I said. His phone buzzed then, and he glanced at the screen. It's Sandra, he muttered. Put it on speaker, I said. He hesitated, then did as I asked. Mom, this is insane. Sandra's voice crackled through the line. There's a moving truck at my house. They're trying to deliver a piano I don't have room for. And Mark says, you're refusing to sell the house. That's right, I said. But we talked about this. No. You talked about it, I corrected. Without me. Mom, people are counting on this sale. I already told Emily she'd have a bedroom here for when you moved in. I'm not moving into your basement, I said. And I'm not selling my house to fund your plans. Silence. Then, her voice hardened. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm making a choice. My choice. I ended the call and handed Mark the envelope addressed to him. Your things will be there this afternoon, I said. Make room. The movers finished up shortly after, and the truck pulled away. Mark stood in the driveway, still holding the envelope, watching me wheel my suitcase to the car. Mom, he said finally, when will you be back? I smiled. I'll let you know. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The plane touched down in Lisbon under a sky so blue it felt almost theatrical, like someone had painted it fresh just for my arrival. I'd been quiet for most of the flight, my mind a jumble of Edward's voice, the image of Mark standing in the driveway with his envelope, and the unshakable knowledge that I was crossing not just an ocean, but a threshold in my life. Customs was quick and polite. When the young officer asked the purpose of my visit, I heard myself say, starting over. He smiled, stamped my passport, and said, Bem-vinda, a Portugal, Senora. Welcome to Portugal. In the arrivals hall, I spotted a petite woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, holding a sign that read, Linda Harris. She looked exactly like I'd imagined from our phone calls. Warm eyes, a steady presence. The kind of woman who knows everyone in her neighborhood. Mrs. Harris, she said, her English clear but lilted with music. I'm Maria Oliveira. It's so good to finally meet you. We hugged like old friends. Thank you for everything you've done, I said. No thanks necessary, she replied. taking my suitcase handle without asking. Russell. Sorry, Edward. He made me promise to look after the place until you came. I'm only doing what he wanted. The drive to the house took less than an hour. Winding along roads lined with whitewashed houses and tiled walls the color of summer seas. Maria pointed out landmarks her favorite cafe, the market where the fishmonger saved the best catch for her, the bakery that sold pastries so good you couldn't stop at one. And then we turned down a narrow lane, and there it was, Edward's dream. The villa was smaller than our house in the States, but perfect in its proportions. White walls with blue shutters, a garden exploding with bougainvillea, lemon trees heavy with fruit. The stone path to the front door was warm underfoot, and when Maria unlocked it and pushed it open, a breeze carrying the scent of the sea slipped inside like a welcome. The interior was simple but elegant: terracotta floors, cream-colored walls, a small terrace that framed the Mediterranean like a painting. The kitchen was bright and tiled in blues and whites, copper pots hanging above a counter stocked with olive oil, bread, and cheese. I put some basics in the fridge, Maria said, gesturing toward the pantry. Tomorrow I will take you to the market. Tonight, you rest. I thanked her, and after she left, I wandered through each room slowly, touching the smooth wooden banisters, running my fingers over the cool tile. In the bedroom, I placed the photo of Edward and me in Venice on the nightstand, just as he'd told me to. For the first time since he died, I felt him close, not as a ghost, tethered to grief, but as a quiet presence, urging me forward. That evening, I sat on the terrace with a glass of vinho verde and watched the sun set in layers of gold and coral over the water. Somewhere in the village below, a church bell rang, and the sound mingled with the soft shush of waves. I realized with a start that I was at peace. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm I hadn't known I craved. Mornings began with walks through the village, where shopkeepers quickly learned my name and began greeting me with warm borndayas. At the market, I discovered figs sweeter than candy and bread so fresh it was still warm when I tore into it. Maria introduced me to her friend João, who ran the tiny bookstore on the corner and insisted on lending me Portuguese novels for practice. In the afternoons, I sat at the wooden table by the terrace, journal open, writing not the novel Edward had always encouraged me to start, but a memoir, not about widowhood, but about marriage, motherhood, and the slow erosion of self that can happen when love turns into service and service turns into obligation. The words came more easily than I expected. Evenings were my favorite. The sun would sink low, the sea turning silver, and I'd pour a glass of wine and let the quiet wrap around me like a shawl. No phone ringing, no voices telling me what I needed to do. Just me, the waves, and the knowledge that every choice I made here was mine alone. On the fourth day, my phone rang for the first time since I'd turned it on. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Emily. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Grandma?" she said when I answered, her tone urgent. "Finally. Where are you?" "In Portugal," I said. There was a pause. "Like, the country Portugal?" "Yes," I said, smiling despite myself. "Your grandfather bought a house here. I'm sitting on the terrace looking at the Mediterranean right now." She let out a long breath. "Mom told me you'd had some kind of breakdown and disappeared." She didn't mention anything about a villa and a sea view. I could hear the edge in her voice, the anger she was trying to manage. "Your mother and uncle have their own version of the truth," I said carefully. "Yeah, and I just found out part of it," Emily said. She told me you've been sending me $500 a month for college for the past 2 years. She acted like it was some big burden she'd been hiding from me. But Grandma, why didn't you tell me? Because she thought it was better that way. Better for who? Emily's voice cracked. Better for her so she could take credit. Better for Uncle Mark? So he could pretend you were broke and needed to sell the house. I feel sick. I stopped calling because Mom said you were fragile and needed space to grieve. But you weren't fragile, were you? You were just... She trailed off, searching for the word. Done, I said. Emily laughed, a small, surprised sound. Done? Yeah. I guess you were. She took a breath. Grandma, can I come see you? I have spring break in 3 weeks. I was going to Cancun. But honestly, that feels stupid now. I'd rather be with you. I hesitated, not because I didn't want her here, but because I wasn't sure what her mother would say or do. I don't care what Mom thinks, Emily said firmly, as if reading my mind. I want to meet the real you, the one who bought a plane ticket to Portugal instead of moving into a basement, the one who said no. My throat tightened. I'd like that, I said softly. When we hung up, I stayed on the terrace long after the stars came out, thinking about how easily my children had tried to erase me from my own life, and how one granddaughter's voice had cut through all of it. Over the next weeks, I made space for Emily in the guest room. Fresh linens, a vase of flowers from the garden, a stack of books I thought she might like. Maria helped me plan a welcome dinner. Grilled fish, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of wine we'd open only when Emily arrived. The morning of her flight, I drove to Lisbon early, nerves fluttering in my stomach. When she emerged from the terminal, I barely recognized her, not the polished, Instagram-ready college student I remembered from Christmas, but a young woman in faded jeans and a white t-shirt, hair pulled back, face bare of makeup. She dropped her bag and hugged me so hard, I felt my ribs protest. You look amazing, she said, pulling back to study me. Like yourself. And you look like my Emily, I said. The drive back was filled with her questions about the village, the people I'd met, and what I'd been writing. When we finally turned onto the lane and she saw the villa, she stopped talking altogether. Grandpa knew, didn't he? She whispered. He knew you'd need this place. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I think he did. That night, we sat on the terrace, plates empty, the sea shimmering under the moon. Emily leaned back in her chair and said, Grandma, I don't know if I'm going back after spring break. Not right away. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out at the dark horizon, thinking how Edward would have smiled at the sight of us here, together, the sound of the waves between our words. Emily's words, not right away, lingered in the air between us, mingling with the scent of grilled fish and the faint salt of the sea. I looked at her across the terrace table, her face lit by the soft glow from the kitchen window, and I realized this was no impulsive spring break whim. She meant it. What would that look like? I asked carefully. She shrugged. But it wasn't a casual shrug. It was the kind that came after weeks of thought. There are American university programs in Lisbon and Porto. I could transfer, or even take a semester off to figure out what I want. I could help you with your book. Maybe work with Maria at the pottery studio she mentioned. She hesitated, glancing toward the dark garden. I think I want to know who I am without Mom's voice in my head all the time. Her words cut straight through me, not because they were aimed at me, but because I recognized the sentiment so well. I'd lived decades with other people's voices, guiding, shaping, and shrinking my choices. Your mother's voice isn't the only one you've been carrying, I said gently. Mine was in there too for a long time. I'm not sure it was always the right kind. Emily leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You were the only one who ever made me feel safe. But I didn't see you as a person, just as my grandma who baked cookies and sent care packages. I didn't ask what you wanted, or how you were doing. I let them tell me you were fragile. I didn't even question it. I shook my head. You were a child. It's not your fault you believed the people you trusted. But I'm not a child now, she said. I can choose differently. That night, we sat out there until the candles burned down to puddles of wax. She told me about school, not just the grades and classes, but how hollow it felt, performing for professors, friends, and a social media audience. She admitted she'd joined the sorority because her mother pushed it, not because she'd wanted it. And I told her about Edward's letter, the trust documents, the villa, about the way I'd felt when Mark and Sandra discussed my life without me, as though I'd already been reduced to a set of real estate and monthly expenses. We went to bed late, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking in the dark, to the press of loneliness. The next morning, Emily joined me for my walk through the village. She greeted the baker with an eager "Bom dia" that made him beam, asked the florist the names of flowers in Portuguese, and helped Maria weed the garden without being asked. Watching her, I felt something shift, not just in her, but in me. I'd been so used to giving without expecting anything back that I'd almost forgotten what it was like to be met halfway. That afternoon, we visited the pottery studio Maria had mentioned. The place smelled of clay and wood smoke, and sunlight streamed through high windows onto shelves of bowls, mugs, and vases in shades of ocean and earth. Maria introduced Emily to her friend Anna, who ran the studio. Within minutes, Emily was at a workbench, her hands in wet clay, laughing at her lopsided attempt at a cup. She's a natural, Anna said to me in Portuguese, and I surprised myself by understanding every word. Over the next week, Emily settled into a rhythm as easily as I had. She worked mornings at the studio, took afternoon walks with me, and spent evenings at the terrace table, helping me sift through my journal entries for the book. Sometimes we worked in companionable silence. Other times, our conversations stretched late into the night, looping from stories of Edward's stubborn kindness to her dreams for the future. One evening, after a long day at the studio, she came out to the terrace with her phone in hand. I just talked to Mom, she said. I braced myself. And? She's not happy. That doesn't surprise me. Emily smiled faintly. She told me you were manipulating me, that you were using this place to lure me away from my life. I told her maybe I needed luring. Her smile grew sharper. I also asked her why, if you were having a breakdown, she hadn't come to see you herself. She didn't have an answer. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly on point. She said I was being selfish, staying here instead of coming home for the rest of the semester. And I told her maybe someone in our family needed to be selfish on your behalf for once. The words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. That's brave, I said. It's honest, she replied. And I'm tired of living in a version of the truth that doesn't feel real. By the end of her second week here, Emily had emailed her professors to arrange for independent study. She told them she'd be working remotely from Portugal until the end of the semester. Her sorority sisters were stunned. Her boyfriend was confused. Her mother was furious. One evening, as we watched the sun sink into the sea, she turned to me. Grandma, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think you'll ever go back? I didn't answer right away. The idea of returning to that house, still mine, still full of Edward's presence, wasn't painful, but it didn't call to me the way it used to. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, this feels like where I'm supposed to be. She nodded. I hope you stay. And I hope I do too. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal. Loss gave me the space to find something new. Emily gave me the courage to claim it. The next morning, she joined me at the market, and we lingered over piles of fresh tomatoes, baskets of olives, and bundles of fragrant herbs. She picked out a bouquet of wildflowers for the terrace table. And as we walked home, she said, I used to think family was just about showing up for the big things. Holidays, birthdays, graduations. Now I think it's about who you want to share the little things with. Her words stayed with me all day. By the end of the month, our days had taken on a shape that felt like home. We cooked together, tried new recipes, learned Portuguese phrases from the shopkeepers, and swapped book recommendations with Zhao at the bookstore. I watched her shoulders relax, her laughter come more easily, and I knew she was seeing herself through a new lens, one not polished by her mother's expectations or clouded by her peers' approval. One night, as we sat on the terrace, she looked at me with a seriousness that made me set my wine glass down. Grandma, I want to be the kind of person who shows up. For you, for the people I love. Not just when it's easy, but when it matters. You already are, I said. No, she shook her head. I'm becoming that person. And I think you are too. It caught me off guard. I'd thought of myself as reclaiming something I'd lost, not becoming someone new. But she was right. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood in her kitchen 3 weeks after Edward's funeral, coffee going cold in her hands while her children decided her future. I was someone who had said no, someone who had crossed an ocean for herself, someone who had made room for joy again. And I wasn't doing it alone. The morning sun poured over Lisbon like honey, spilling gold across the tiled rooftops. Emily and I stood at the top of a narrow cobblestone street in Alfama, the oldest neighborhood in the city. The air smelled of fresh bread from a bakery down the lane, and somewhere nearby, the soft twang of a Portuguese guitar floated through an open window. This place feels alive, Emily said, taking it all in. She was wearing the wide-brimmed straw hat we'd found at the market 2 days ago, and her cheeks glowed from the climb up the hill. It is alive, I said. You can't walk here without feeling the history under your feet. Edward loved it for that reason. Said it made him feel small in the best way. We wandered down the street, stopping to admire balconies draped in laundry that looked like flags of daily life. White sheets, blue shirts, a single red dress, swaying in the breeze. Emily paused to photograph a doorway painted the color of ripe oranges. You could write a book just about these doors, she said. I might, I said with a smile. At the bottom of the hill, we ducked into a small cafe Maria had recommended. The owner, an older man with a mustache as grand as his smile, greeted us like old friends. Dois bicas? He asked 2 espressos. Sim, Emily replied, her pronunciation surprisingly good. We sat at a table outside, sipping the rich, dark coffee. Across the street, a group of children chased a soccer ball, their shouts echoing off the ancient walls. Emily watched them for a long moment before turning to me. I feel like I'm seeing you for the first time. I tilted my head. What do you mean? You're not fragile. You're not this lonely widow in need of rescue. You're someone who made a huge, brave decision, and you're happy about it. I didn't know that woman existed. I thought about how my children had painted me in her mind. Small, dependent, easy to manage. She existed, I said quietly. She was just buried under everyone else's idea of who I should be. Emily nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. I think I've done the same thing, let other people's version of me take over. I'm tired of that. After coffee, we took a tram to Belém, where the air was thick with the scent of custard and cinnamon from the famous pastry shop. We bought 2 warm pastéis de nata and ate them on a bench by the river, powdered sugar dusting our fingers. Emily licked hers clean and laughed. If I stayed here forever, I'd live on these. Not a bad way to live, I said. We walked along the water, the April breeze lifting our hair. Emily told me about her pottery lessons, about how satisfying it was to make something from scratch with her hands. I told her about my writing, how the pages were slowly becoming chapters, how the act of telling my story was changing the way I thought about my past. By late afternoon, we headed back to the villa, where Maria was waiting with a basket of lemons from her garden. She invited us over for tea, and we followed her across the lane to her kitchen, which smelled of fresh mint and warm bread. Maria poured tea into mismatched cups, her eyes twinkling as she asked Emily about America. Emily answered politely, but when Maria asked if she missed it, Emily hesitated. I miss my friends, she said, but not the way of living. Not the rushing and the competing. Not feeling like I'm always trying to meet someone else's standard. Maria reached across the table and patted her hand. Then you have found the right place, she said simply. On the walk back to the villa, Emily slipped her arm through mine. She's right, you know. This place, it's more than just beautiful. It makes you slow down, makes you think about what actually matters. I squeezed her arm. That's exactly why Edward bought it. He wanted a place where we could just be, without noise, without pressure. That evening, we took our dinner grilled sardines and roasted vegetables to the terrace. The sky was painted in pinks and purples, the sea shimmering like silk. Emily was quiet through most of the meal, and when I finally asked what she was thinking, she said, I want to be like you. It startled me. Like me? Yes. I want to be someone who can stand on her own, even when it's hard. Someone who makes her own choices, even if other people don't like them. I set down my fork. Emily, I wasn't always that person. For a long time, I was more concerned with keeping the peace than with being true to myself. It took me most of my life to realize that peace bought with silence isn't really peace at all. She leaned back in her chair, looking out at the horizon. Then maybe I can start earlier. Maybe I can learn from you. The next day, we decided to take a trip to the coast. We drove along winding roads that opened suddenly to cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, the water crashing far below. Emily stood at the edge, the wind whipping her hair, and I could see in her face the same exhilaration I'd felt when I first arrived here. This is what freedom feels like, she said, almost to herself. We spent the afternoon walking the beach, collecting shells, and watching fishermen mend their nets. At one point, Emily slipped her hand into mine and said, Thank you for letting me see the real you. I looked at her, my granddaughter who had arrived here still, half buried under her mother's expectations, now standing taller, her eyes brighter. Thank you for wanting to see, I said. That night, back at the villa, we lit candles on the terrace and shared a bottle of wine. Emily told me she'd been accepted into the study abroad program in Lisbon, starting next semester. She'd still need to go back to the States briefly to arrange things, but she planned to return by autumn. I want to build something here, she said. Not just a life for me, but a relationship with you, the real you. My throat tightened. I'd like that more than you know. The days that followed were a blend of exploration and quiet routine morning walks to the bakery, afternoons at the pottery studio or writing desk, evenings on the terrace. Emily began to make friends in the village, young people from all over Europe who came for work or study and stayed for the sea, air, and slow pace. She spoke more Portuguese now, her confidence growing with each conversation. One afternoon, as we returned from the market, she stopped at the villa gate and looked at me. "Grandma, you're my role model. Not because you're perfect, but because you decided your life was yours again. I want to remember that every time I'm tempted to give it away to someone else's plan." Her words stayed with me long after she went inside. I realized that Edward's gift, the house, the letter, the trust, had been more than a safety net. It had been a challenge to reclaim myself. And now, somehow, that challenge had expanded to include Emily. Our time together in Lisbon had become more than just a visit. It was a bridge, not just between generations, but between who we had been and who we were becoming. She saw me now, not as someone to protect, but as someone to learn from. And I saw her, not as someone to shield, but as someone ready to step into her own strength. As the sun set that evening, painting the sea gold, I thought of something Edward had once said. "The best legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you leave strong enough to carry their own life." Watching Emily laugh in the kitchen as she sliced bread for dinner, I knew we were building exactly that. The summer air in Lisbon was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the evenings seemed to stretch endlessly, the horizon holding the sun just a little longer before letting it slip away. Emily and I sat on the terrace, our plates pushed aside, a half-empty bottle of wine between us. The sea was calm tonight, the kind of calm that made you think everything in life could, in fact, find its place. "Grandma," Emily said, breaking the quiet, "I've decided. I'm coming back here in the fall. I've already told the program director I'm transferring to the Lisbon campus." She smiled, but it wasn't the tentative smile of a girl testing an idea. It was the steady, certain smile of someone claiming her own path. I nodded, feeling no surprise, only a deep satisfaction. "I had a feeling," I said. "You belong here, not because of the place, but because of what you've found in yourself here." She looked at me for a long moment. "And what about you? Are you going back to the States?" The question hung in the air. I thought of my house back home, still mine, still full of memories. I thought of Mark and Sandra, of the conversations we'd had and the ones we hadn't. I thought of Edward's letter, the one that had been both a lifeline and a challenge. "I think," I said slowly, "that I'm already home." Her eyes softened, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Then we're both exactly where we're supposed to be." The next few weeks were filled with preparations, Emily wrapping up her arrangements for school, me finalizing the book manuscript I'd been working on since the day I arrived. I decided to call it Saying No, a simple title for the hardest thing I'd ever learned to do. On Emily's last morning before her brief trip back to the States, we walked down to the harbor to watch the fishing boats come in. The air was sharp with salt, gulls crying overhead. She slipped her arm through mine and said, "When I come back, I want to start a project together. Something that's ours." I smiled. "I think I know just the thing." We didn't need to say what it was. We both knew it would be something that reflected who we'd become: independent, grounded, and unafraid to choose our own lives. That evening, after she left for the airport, I stood on the terrace alone. The sun dipped into the sea, and the first stars appeared, faint but certain. I thought of Edward and the quiet strength of his gift, of how it had carried me across an ocean and into a life I hadn't dared to imagine. And I thought of Emily, my granddaughter, walking into her own strength beside me. The sea whispered below, and I realized I no longer needed to look back. My future and hers was right here, unfolding with the tide. Looking back, I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say no to expectations that suffocate you, to versions of yourself built from other people's needs, to the quiet erosion of your own dreams. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping silent. But silence only made me smaller. Edward's gift didn't just give me a house in Portugal, it gave me the space to remember who I was, before I let everyone else decide for me. And in choosing myself, I discovered something unexpected. I gave permission to the people I love, like Emily, to choose themselves too. Life will always pull at you. Try to convince you that your worth is measured by how much you give up for others. But the truth is, you serve no one, not even the ones you love, by living a life that isn't your own. Standing on my terrace now, watching the tide roll in, I know this. Peace built on honesty and self-respect is worth every difficult conversation, every raised eyebrow, every mile traveled to get there. And once you find it, you'll never go back to the life you had before.